Well, hello everyone, and welcome to an exciting Slater forum where we will discuss the question, how can AI help optimize life science localization in a decentralized world? Our objective is to create a roadmap to machine learning and using machine learning technology to optimize current localization workflows for greater efficiency, security, and savings. This event is being run in partnership with SYSTRAN, a global leader in machine translation technology. With a strong focus in research and development, SYSTRAN leads the industry with a number of innovative solutions widely used by companies and consumers. My name is Andrew Smart. I'm a co-founder and commercial director at Slater, and I'm delighted to be your host today. We have a well-balanced audience of operational and strategic roles at pharma, medtech, and healthcare providers. This sets up for an excellent Q&A discussion with your participation. So thank you for investing your valuable time with us today. Now, as clinical trial sponsors strive to bring new drugs to more markets faster and more efficiently, they must do so also to improve the experience for patients and physicians. All aspects of the product lifestyle, from development through post-surveillance, must be tracked at increasing volumes and documented in very specific ways in every market. Non-compliance in content can result in delays to market, recalls, fines, and more importantly, patient safety. How can AI help optimize life science localization in a decentralized world? Today, we will hear from three industry experts from SYSTRAN, Big Language Solutions, and MemoQ, all of whom have decades of experience. We'll begin with a keynote presentation by Mark Schreiner, Strategic Sales Director at MemoQ. Mark has had several leadership positions and roles in the localization industry over the past 2 decades. In his role as Strategic Sales Director for MemoQ, he supports the company's market expansion efforts in the regulated industries and other strategic sales and marketing initiatives. To give us a view on what's driving growth in the life science industry, I'd like to introduce and welcome Mark Schreiner to the stage. Mark, can you join me on screen? How are you today?
Good, and yourself?
I'm excellent. Thank you very much for sharing your views. I'll leave the stage with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. Hello, everybody. As Andrew just did, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, hosted by SYSTRAN, facilitated by Slater, and supported by MemoQ and Big Language Solutions. I've been asked to sort of set the stage for the interactive discussion that will follow. What I'm going to do is we're going to talk at a very high level about some of the developments, major developments in the life sciences industries. And then we're going to drill down and talk about some of the specific kind of tactics and strategies that are being used by life sciences organizations to kind of facilitate the growth or expected growth and expansion in life sciences. And then we're going to drill down even further into some very specific things that affect localization workflows, localization providers, and enterprise companies that have to localize life sciences related content. Andrew already kind of introduced who I am, so I'm not going to spend any more time on that. I will say that I do spend a lot of time interacting with life sciences organizations. At MemoQ, it's one of our target markets because of the clear growth trajectory that life science organizations are under right now. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but also because the needs with those organizations in terms of quality, reliable turnaround times, and then security nicely align with our platform offerings. I kind of, before we get into throwing a bunch of the data at you, I want to spend a few minutes to talk about a couple different things. One is life science is in an industry where subject matter experts really bring a lot of value to the table. And as such, you have people like Craig and Bill, who are going to talk a little bit later, who are deep subject matter experts in the industry. And it's really important. It's very different from, say, just general translation and localization. There's all kinds of regulatory requirements, readability requirements, security requirements that your providers need to be in tune with. It's also an area that I believe the traditional three-legged model for translation pricing doesn't apply, and for two reasons. One is, just as a refresher, the three-legged model is, price, quality, and turnaround time. And you can always get two, but you can't get three. So you may get fast turnaround times and you may get good quality, but you're going to end up paying a very high price for it, traditionally, okay? And the argument has always been you can only get 2, you can never get 3. So you could get quality and attractive pricing, but then it's going to be slow. Okay. I would argue that in life sciences, there's an extra stool or an extra leg to that stool, excuse me, or an extra pillar, and that would be on security and data protection. So you have quality, you have attractive pricing, you have the appropriate turnaround time, but you also need data protection and security. And I'll talk about why that's important a little bit later. The interesting thing, though, is with the use of AI and MT in specific applications, you can achieve the 3 legs that we've always been told you can't have all 3, but with MT you can, and I'll give some examples of that later. But additionally, depending on the hosting option that you choose, you can also achieve that data protection and privacy requirement as well. But I just want to set the stage that the 3-legged pricing model no longer really applies. It's 4 legs, and MT and AI can help you achieve that in specific applications. Now, I want to go to the slides. Again, high-level industry outlook is the CRO market, or the contract research organization market, is expected to grow between 7 and 8% between now and 2027. So almost doubling in that time. Asia is leading the way. It's supposed to be around 9% compound annual growth. Contract research organizations, they help with clinical trials, et cetera. I think most people understand that. But why is that interesting? If you're a localization provider, you want to be in an industry that's growing and has very nice, solid growth trajectory. Whether you're a service provider or you're actually in a life sciences organization, the outlook is pretty darn good. Pharma sales are expected to go up by about 7% globally in 2022. That's this year, even though that we are into some kind of weird economic recession with supply chain issues, et cetera. There are 180 different mRNA products that are clinical trials and pipelines right now. There's over 50 billion that will be invested in cell and gene therapy by 2027. If you want to place your bets and your subject matter expertise, you look at where the growth opportunities are. CGT obviously would be one. Another one, if I was a solution provider, technology provider, or a service provider, I would be really looking at the wearable medical device. It's expected to go from 21 billion to 112 billion. That's amazing growth trajectory there. And if I was a service provider, I would be making sure that I would be developing an offering related specifically to WMDs, the whole approval process, labeling, the instructions for use, the marketing, et cetera. I'm not going to go through all these, but you can see private equity investment is very significant, 47 billion last year. And here's an interesting one. The estimated amount of healthcare data that was collected in 2020 is 2,314 exabytes. R&D spending is up. That's a leading indicator. And the key for all of this is that every company in life sciences, the number one thing they're talking about these days is digital transformation. How does that affect you? Well, whether you're a service provider, an MT provider, you're in-house subject matter expert at a life sciences organization, because of this big emphasis on digital transformation, the time is perfect for deploying MT tools, AI tools, workflow automation tools. The time is right, the budgets are there, and everybody agrees that due to what's going on in the world with this growth trajectory and some of the reasons, some of the aspects of it, right now, the only way to achieve these goals is to automate and do this digital transformation. So on to the next slide, please. Okay, this is just one example of the decentralized world. It has nothing to do with workflows per se. Bill and Craig are going to share some slides later that jump specifically into that. But if you just look at this, the US FDA is cooperating and collaborating with over 28 different regulatory authorities all around the world. And then they're obviously have their virtual meetings, they're overseeing trials, they're giving guidance, they're looking at studies. How can they do that in a timely and secure manner? They need to adopt modern work practices and tools. And we're going to talk very specifically about those on the next slide, please. So adaptive trial using AI. So here's an application for AI. An adaptive trial is we're monitoring, is the treatment working? It's not working, we're not getting the right effect. We'll change the treatment up live with individual patients. This is becoming much more common. Decentralized trials. It used to be if you were a trial, you would go to a central location. Now the trial providers are going to the participants. And that requires, again, communication tools, etc. Huge emphasis now on inclusiveness, diversity, inclusiveness. We can't just limit our trials to one geographic area, one ethnicity, one culture, etc. We need to be as inclusive as possible. In order to do that, again, we need tools that will allow us to communicate in the appropriate manner. AI is being used for marketing efforts. This is working. Great. It's not working. We need to change it up. It's AI-powered chatbots to talk with trial participants, but also with consumers. Even looking at market analysis and understanding, okay, again, what's working, what's not, but what are the opportunities? Rolling submissions. It used to be people would go through clinical trials, or organizations, I should say, and they would gather all the information and then submit. Automation throughout all aspects of the supply chain, the trial process, etc. And then there's the regional collaboration all around the world between not just the regulatory bodies, but different pharma companies. And with all of that, there's a massive increase with cyber risk, because the more people that you have, the more organizations that you have, and the more remote they are, those are all different threat vectors. So you need to have a plan in place, and you need to use tools that will limit your exposure to cyber risk. MT can help us achieve targets for, again, I mentioned that, cost, speed, quality, and security. Don't let anybody tell you that you can only have 2 out of the 3, and don't let them tell you that there's only 3. When it comes to life sciences or other regulated industries, there's definitely 4, and in specific applications, MT can be the solution for all 4. The test the waters approach that I just mentioned, that our Bill talked about, is very, very, very much typical in your organization. If there's reluctance to adapting machine translation, because if I look at the poll results, quality is a main concern and security is the second leading concern. If that's a concern, start with less critical documents and then try to expand the deployment as the output hits your appropriate targets. One thing, post-market vigilance, PMV, is when you are receiving feedback from, could be hundreds of countries around the world in different languages, you can use MT to run through and kind of shorten the turnaround time. There's a study, if you Google it, where Medtronic used MT to reduce a turnaround time for PMV from 14 days to an hour. And it's really important because if there are some adverse effects, oftentimes regulators require that you report them within 48 hours. So how are you going to do that with traditional workflows? With MT, you can get there. Post-editing and human in the loop continue as standard. One thing that you need to look at are these different ISO certifications, both for the translation and data protection, but also specific for medical devices and machine translation. Last 4 points here. I just watched a really good presentation from Adam Wooten, who's a professor at Middlebury Institute. He presented a study that shows the amount that you invest in the front end is saved 3 or 4 times than if you wait and invest on the back end. So if you invest in training the MT engine up front and getting it right, you will save exponentially in terms of the editing, the post-editing that's required on the back end. One thing to keep in mind is some MT providers have restrictions that disallow you from using their engine for things like critical infrastructure, military applications, and medical devices, unless you get written permission from them. So make sure you check with your MT provider, whether that's even allowed or advised. Last one is really important, is make sure you work with a provider that provides multiple hosting options, because your organization may have very specific regulatory requirements depending on where you're located. If you're in the EU, you might be under GDPR. If you're in the US, it typically goes state by state. So you need to work with an MT provider that can adapt to your regulatory situation. Last thing is looking for an MT engine that has the ability to integrate with other tools, because you'll never achieve that automated workflow if it's just a standalone solution and then you're manually taking the output and putting it into another tool. What I would like to recommend is we're going to move on with the panel discussion. If anybody has any questions or would like for me to provide the sources for the information, I can do that. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn. Andrew, back to you.
Thank you, Mark, for that highly informative overview. You've talked a lot of data in a lot of detail, which we can dive in now deeper with our panelists. And I'd like to invite Craig and Bill to join us on the stage. It's also a highly complex process, which I think we can really dive into now. Welcome, Bill. Welcome, Craig.
Hi.
Bill Young is the Director of Life Sciences at SYSTRAN, and Craig is the Vice President of Strategic Accounts at Big Language Solutions. Bill, if you could introduce yourself for the audience and then follow that by Craig.
Hi, I'm Bill Young. I am the Director of Life Science Sales at SYSTRAN Software, and I have about 2.5 decade history with actually neurosurgery to development of software in the business development, and then also translation.
Hi there, I'm Craig Brown. Been in the translation industry since 2009. I feel most people in our industry have worn many hats over the years. Started at RWS's patent division, editing and typing up translations, and since 2014 I've specialized in translations for the life sciences. Joined the EU Life Science Centre at what is now Big Language Solutions, where today I head up our EU Strategic Accounts team.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us for this panel discussion. Craig, you're in London. Bill and Mark are on the West Coast, so we've got great coverage. Just to really jump into things here and to lead with you, Craig, Mark talked a lot about the drivers of content growth and the increasing pressures in the product life cycle. And that product life cycle, as we can see from the slide here, remains long and complex. So can you elaborate on how you see the current situation and the various types of content and volume that you see as most critical throughout the various stages?
Sure. Okay. Well, first of all, as a translation supplier, we have a relatively narrow, but I think really unique window onto clinical research, but also the life sciences in general. So we can definitely see regulatory, technological, demographic changes in Europe, particularly at the moment, that impact the way we deliver our services, how we're interacting with CROs, the way in which translations are procured for these processes in front of us, many of which use these AI tools we're discussing to augment our work. This whole process here is very long, very expensive, but we've seen in the past couple of years, clinical research timelines are being compressed, and anecdotally from our clients, we're hearing that they continue and will continue to be compressed. There are also more trials going on. Clinical research, as Mark said, is growing. More trials, more competition amongst our clients to recruit the right study subjects, which means greater creativity when it comes to reaching them, retaining them, consenting them. Even outside of this process for a further second, there's political instability we're looking at in Europe in particular. We're looking at Ukrainian populations fleeing war, moving from what was a hotbed of clinical research throughout Europe. So our clients are finding they have to pivot now and translate into new languages they weren't considering. They're translating patient information and product information into Ukrainian. And all this is happening in front of a backdrop of new regulations where we are in Europe. We want to make Europe attractive for clinical research. We want to make the process more transparent, more patient-centric, as Andrew said at the beginning. So from our perspective, this means the burden of translation in each of these phases has shifted to the beginning of the trial. So our clients are expected to submit more translated documentation, lay summaries in the languages of the countries in which trials are conducted. And it also means more than ever before, and again, this plays into what Mark was saying, we've got to be more reactive than ever when translating, revising these documents, translating regulatory correspondence, adverse event reports. So yeah, you asked me also what document types we're seeing. All of the above. The bulk of the documents sit in three primary pots: highly medical, protocols, brochures, discharge summaries, patient-facing documents in lay language, and then there's of course the very, you could call it transactional regulatory considerations, authorization documents, certificates. So it's quite a range. Most of it requires quite a high level of medical expertise. Bill, anything to add there in terms of document types you're seeing?
Yes, the drivers that I'm going to point out is the diverse regions and demographics that allow now reach with the home health nursing and also direct-to-patient delivery systems. And these delivery systems, actually, the logistics part of it is going to grow to about 5.4 billion by year 2028. The other thing too, 62% of FDA-approved drugs are tested outside the United States. I'm just talking United States specific. The other is that in telehealth and e-health in general, the patient visits were prior to COVID. COVID was kind of launch in the DCT whole phenomenon, but it was less than 1% with provider visits, and now it's grown to 1 in 4. As far as documents to be translated, clinical protocols, patient diaries, questionnaires, PROs, IFUs, labeling, all this, well, except for labeling, could be you put a little E in front of it. Everything is digitalized now and can be handled with a central machine translation, platform. And I do have some. I'll talk later about how the quality is enhanced over neuro machine translation over the years with the progress evolution of machine translation.
And I could just like to chime in to kind of reinforce both your points. I don't know if people realize, but the approval timeline has been for a traditional cancer drug is 10 plus years. For the vaccines, it was down to 10 months. And you cannot compress things that much without using different automation tools.
Well, I mean, so there's a lot happening in terms of more trials, shorter timelines, greater expense, and as you mentioned, a lot of it's being pushed to the front end. But Bill, within the life science industry, where do you see the centralization and disconnection impacting these workflows?
Centralization, well, for instance, DCT is in a centralized machine translation platform. They're going to reduce the protocol amendment filings. That's a big hurdle with patient safety, study design, site deletions, and personal deletions. All those things happen during a study, and all that can be reduced. And they're seeing about 27% reduction with a centralized platform, with DCT and MT platform. And then also for screening patients, you've got social media now. You can screen patients a lot better. Retention is a lot more hardened. And then time reduced by 10% with a central platform. But on cost, when you incorporate a machine translation as a first pass for all of your translated material, you can bank on it about 30% of your total translation budget will reduce.
Well, Craig, do you have anything you'd like to add to that? I mean, there's a lot more in terms of packaging, post-surveillance, anything else?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite broad, isn't it? I think it was quite telling. I think, did I see in that first poll that people prioritized quality and security quite highly? And I think that's a big part of this. When we talk about decentralization, I think we also talk about fragmentation. And what I mean by this is that still, and this is a barrier to adoption, I think, of some of these AI tools, still in this industry, LSPs are selected by departments according to needs as they arise. And as a result, companies we speak to, they may not even know how many LSPs they're working with. And I can think of one in particular we spoke to last year who believed that they were probably working with 50 or 60 providers. That's actually quite common, and it's natural as pharma companies have grown over the years and have adopted different processes across the organization. But the hard truth is that means there's an awful lot of duplication going on. There's probably duplicate spending. There is a varying approach to the quality that we've seen in the poll people prioritize in our industry. There's also an unnecessary burden placed on the translation buyers who are trying to balance these vendors, how the translations are stored and retrieved. And I think these are some challenges that AI can definitely help solve. I think we need to centralize the way that these translations are procured as well, and benefit from the scale that the translation memories, for example, can bring.
Can I just add one other thing?
Yeah.
So when you have a centralized MT platform, with whatever the company, like for instance, translation memory, term-based, anything that's company specific will be fed into the machine. The machine then reads off that, encodes words into vectors and makes the correlations to do the proper translation. That way you get a more solid, compliant translation. So when you do a first pass on your translation with a centralized MT Hub. And any kind of patient-facing will be refined or revised with human in the loop. So just to keep that in mind, that's kind of the basic core argument for machine translation. And also the fact that it accesses libraries like Medra as well. Sorry, Mark.
No, I'd like to add something. I mean, if you look at the poll respondents, nobody mentioned price. They mentioned quality and security, right? And if we look at the example that I gave earlier with the post-market vigilance, the driver should be security and speed, because you have regulatory requirements to report certain adverse effects within 48 hours. How can you do that with traditional workflows? So the use of MT and automation can help you achieve that time or that speed objective, and also security, because using a machine, depending on where it's hosted, is infinitely more secure than sending it out to translators, remote translators, okay? Anytime you involve people in the equation, you have a threat vector. So MT solves those big concerns right there of security. And with PMV, the quality threshold isn't as critical. You just need to see, hey, is this something that we need to drill down on and report to the regulators? So there are certain applications where machine right out of the box is an appropriate solution.
Well, you've sort of jumped ahead to my next question, really.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Well, it means the conversation is moving in the right direction. And so therefore, my question to Bill was, given all of these challenges in the product lifecycle and what you just talked about, where can MT benefit and improve workflows? So can you speak a little bit to that? I know you were touching on it. Mark just talked about MT right out of the box, but here we actually need to implement it in a much more broader and deeper sense. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. So like the best is to say that if you were to adopt internal communication, right? We can go back to that one slide that you had, but okay, we can stick it here. So phase 1 and phase 4 are kind of the light regulatory burden communication phases. Phase 2 and phase 3 of a study, you're going to need human in the loop to refine, and plus the fact that any human in the loop operation is going to be certified. A machine translation platform is not, and it's because it's a first pass. So it gets the CRO, the study reviewer or controller, the control over the machine that the diction that's being translated, and then any phase 2, phase 3 refined post editing, that then goes to the human in the loop. As far as adopting machine translation, it should start with repetitive tasks and use as a first pass for translation, and then it also avoids any kind of like what you had mentioned, Andrew, about bottlenecks with regional translating houses that are either slow or fast or don't know medical terminology in the first place. So,
I agree, Bill, and I like the fact that we're talking human in the loop, because I think people forget that actually to get the best out of these tools, you have to feed them with high quality translation assets, don't you? And I think at our disposal, when you've been in business as long as we have, you have access to and our clients have access to high quality translations from past studies and successful marketing authorizations. These are all feeding into our MT solution for the client tomorrow, aren't they?
And I'll just add too that if you have a central machine translation platform in place, it's already prepped. When it goes through the study, the drug is approved or the medical device is approved, you're ready for the pharmacovigilance post-surveillance with your term base already loaded into that AI system. And then,
Was this also something I think you wanted to talk a little bit about this? So you talked about intelligence, multilingual support.
Multilingual support for customer support, that's in your pre-market or post-market phase. A chatbot, that's with any of your frequently asked questions. You can have that set up for any kind of like portal communication with potential patients. And then also e-learning, translated e-learning. So if you want to educate the reps in those regions for the sale or consultation with clinicians.
Now, you talked about where, you know, it can be applied, but are there any examples of perhaps where people have wandered in the wrong direction using, you know, publicly accessible or free translation tools like Google Translate, you know, like things that might lead to other problems like security?
There's a reason that they're offered for free, because because you're putting all your information in, they can get mine, and so you know, you want to have an off-grid or off-web machine platform to protect your data, your client, your patient data, and your any medical, you know, trade secrets that you have. You don't want to put it out on a free platform.
I'd just like to invite the the audience, if they have any questions, they can submit them in the stage chat. And Craig, I think you were about ready to add something there.
Yeah, just to say, we don't really know how big that hidden translation market is. You know, the use of Google Translate. We do know anecdotally that it's triggered, it triggered an RFP for one of our clients last year. They just had to find a solution to stop their internal staff using automatic translation tools, sending things out into the ether. You know, and also not to give it to Julian in accounts because he happens to speak Flemish or, you know, Italian. You know, they need a tool that is set up to quickly either gist what they need, find the relevant adverse event in the reams of documents in another language, and they need it quickly.
Well, I think, you know, Slater reported a couple of times over the years of these types of breaches, not always in the life science sector, but actually in legal, private banking. You know, there have been forces that have appeared on the internet through law firms using these sorts of things. So it really is a very, very serious issue. Go back to our questions then. I really wanted to then touch on with you, Craig, why is translation memory so critical to this process, and why is the workflow cost, you know, generally higher? I mean, Mark was talking about investing at the front end. Why is it higher at the front end?
Well, I think bluntly, it's because we start with every client. We start at ground zero. You know, we start with an empty TM. We may start with some translation assets. The investment in the beginning is for the new translation units, and so there are cases, and you know, we frequently are approached by companies who want to get going immediately. Right, we want to disrupt the current paradigm we have, throw MT at it, throw CAT at it. But actually, you need to take a thoughtful approach. You have to make sure that the quality management system matches the goal you have for your documents. You're going to invest in aligning the translation assets. If they've been translated by another LSP, what's the quality like? Were they approved by regulatory authorities? So this is the reason for the initial investment. But you know, you're playing a long game, and the assets you translate today will feed into the savings you have tomorrow.
And Bill, in terms of this timeline and the impact of cost and long-term cost optimization, is there anything you can add as to how this smooths out?
Yeah, well, as far as time, if you can put it this way, you know, your typical traditional translator can do 2,000 words a day in translation. When you implement the machine translation platform into that as a first pass, now you up it to about 4 times that, so 8,000 words per day. As far as cost, you can look at it this way. I mean, it's a consistent industry acceptance that when you implement a machine translation platform, you're going to save about 30% of your multilingual budget. So if you look at, say, a third phase study that costs anywhere from 50 to 65 million, right? And your translation is about 10 to 15%. You're looking at about 10 million for your budget for translation, okay? And if you implement the machine translation into that, you're going to save about, you can bank on about 6% of the total cost of that budget, or 3 million to 5 million, just in that particular example. So I just want to give that, put that in perspective.
Now, Mark, I want to give you an opportunity. I don't know if there's anything you want to chime in about that, since you actually raised the point initially in your presentation.
What we're seeing is, again, it's all about the investing on the front end, because again, we're a tool provider. So typically our emphasis is, you know, building up that TM. If you get old documents or any documents, as much content as you can, and align it and build up that translation memory. Then whatever's left over, you run through a finely tuned MT engine, and you can sometimes, depending on the domain type, you may not even need to do any post editing. It may, because if you look at manuals, for example, the terminology, depending on the industry and depending on the manual, the terminology from year to year is basically the same. And there might be, from one given manual, might be 5% of new content. So by just automating it through the TM, then the MT, you again achieve the savings, the fast turnaround. And then another thing that we're looking at, and I'm curious about what Craig and Bill are seeing, is that we're seeing post-editing more and more people who are specializing in that skill, because it's not translation. It's a very specific skill. And to be able to, and when you're looking at translated content, accuracy is super, super important. And if you're just editing and not checking the accuracy, if you're just polishing the text, you may be setting yourself up for some critical mistakes. So Craig, I mean, are you seeing more specialization for, go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We're also seeing it as a great way for our translators to diversify and sort of be brought into the modern world to some extent. I can think of one example recently where I met a company who were using machine translation. They were sending that output straight to a clinical trial assistant to review, and they couldn't work out why there were quality issues going through this workflow, and they just hadn't appreciated that you do need proper post editing and review to make sure that work is sort of reaches the patient in the right format and the right language. So I think it's emerging, and I think people need to appreciate the work it takes to set up the engine properly with the right translation inputs to get the right outputs, and post editing is definitely very important. That.
Well, very quickly, Craig, I just want to ask, why is there a bump, as we approach year 2 in terms of the cost? What would be a driver of new costs here?
New products, we see, well, let's see, marketing authorization applications. You may trigger a variation because of a new safety signal, or a new indication, or a line extension for an existing medicine. This new text needs to be translated afresh. It never gets back up to perhaps the initial investment that you had, but that new text needs to be translated, revised, added to a TM, fed into your engine.
Now, I think we want to get on to some of back to the original question at the start of this, and sort of address what, with these drivers. Bill, what are some of the main fears clients have about starting this whole process? I mean, it's a very large and complex process, but where do you see these fears? What are the fears, and how are you helping clients overcome them?
So the main fear, obviously, is going to be the regulatory pressure and getting it right with patient-facing information, any content. Again, where I try to alleviate that is to say that if you use it as an initial first pass platform, you control instead of giving thousands of pages of untranslated documents to a house that's going to take 2,000 words per day to translate. You can shorten that time with machine translation, and I made that case before. So it's not so with the advent of encoding words to vectors, to then decoding to translation, and improving the accuracy of translated data. So in our internal studies, 40% of the time, our translated in domain, medical, banking, and finance, all that is mistaken for human translation at 41% of the time, and a consistency. Okay, so if you can get there quicker with machine translation, and then have the human in the loop refined, your expense is going to drop dramatically, your time is going to drop dramatically, and your quality is going to be there because the houses that human in the loop are certified. The process is certified.
Craig, is there anything you'd want to add, or do you want to touch on any of the recent EU regulation as well?
Well, no, I mean, I'd piggyback off the back of Bill's comment, and I'd say that this doesn't need to be a revolution at your organization, and I think sometimes the aggregation of marginal gains. Introducing this technology for appropriate document types at the right time is really efficient. You increase efficiency by 1% in many different areas, and you'll see overall the reduction in costs that these guys have been mentioning. Yeah.
Bill, I think you had an example with one of your clients that was using Model Studio to build a new domain, and they used their internal language team in combination with an MT. Do you remember talking about that?
Yeah, so Model Studio kind of enriches the context to be more compliant with translation. So basically, it's what I was talking about, where it runs an algorithm on already translated documentation from an organization. So any kind of use cases they can feed into that engine, it enriches the quality of the output. So it's basically a loop pattern with your machine translation platform. The AI will then do correlations on every word in the text that you feed it. So you can feed it, thousands of documents of data sets of already translated content into the machine, and it's going to read off of that, and it's going to be more corporate specific in terms of terminology.
Excellent, thank you.
Well, I think in a summary slide of the benefits from this conversation, I think we need to add security. I know you've touched on cost, speed, but also security has come up repeatedly in terms of, I know how it needs to be important to quality. So I'd like to take just a quick moment to ask the audience if they have any final questions to put them in the stage chat. And in the meantime, I just want to go one by one for any summary comments. If you could maybe take 30 seconds or a minute. We'll start with you, Bill. Are there any final comments you'd like to share?
On security. So basically, if you do an on-premise server, if you do that option, that's going to be a blade server behind your firewall and in your quality management system. So you're protected. It's just a tool for translating automation. So automating your workflow for translation. Craig,
any final thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, I can chip it on the missing security icon there. It's of course very important, especially now everyone is working from home. The decentralized way of life is here to stay. A lot of files being thrown around by email. So find a solution with the right security in place, SOC 2 Type 2 certification. Make sure they take that seriously. There's a lot of M&A going on in both our industries at the moment, and it's ripe for that kind of security breach. So yeah, glad that came up during the chat.
I think we've made a lot of very important points. So I just want to thank you all for your contributions and sharing your very valuable experience with us today. We're putting up a poll based on today's discussion. How far, based on the discussion so far, how likely are you to engage with your LSP or your internal team to discuss the use of AI going forward? And in the meantime, while people vote on that poll, I'd like to thank Mark, Craig, and Bill again for your valuable time and experience. I'd like to thank SYSTRAN for partnering with us on today's event. And I'd like to highlight, since so many things have been talked about here, that SYSTRAN have generously offered a free 30-minute localization workflow assessment and consultation. Now, we will be reaching out to all of you after this event to provide you with the video recording and a feedback form, and to see if you'd like to take up this offer. Thank you as well to everyone who attended today for taking time out of your schedule. And if you have any other further questions for speakers, let us know, let me know. You can approach them directly. We're all on LinkedIn, or we can do it through the feedback form. But until then, I'd like to thank you all.